From me, Malcolm Parker, welcome to CEFPRO Global TPRM Conference. Just by way of introduction, just so you know you're talking to for the next 28 minutes, I'm the TPRM Service Line Leader for Mobius. I've been in risk management for over 18 years. As a consultant, I've assisted large and small companies across most industries, and I've also had the benefit of working for a few large corporates. So that is why I get the honor of talking to you today. Let's take a quick look at the agenda.
First on the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about why TPRM matters. Over here, I think it's important to realize that each organization has a different context. Think about the context of your organization. Why does TPRM matter to you? Think about your third parties and the complexity of how you are relying on third parties within your organization. This is very specific to your organization. So as we go through that section, I really want you to focus on your organization and your vendors. Secondly, we're going to be looking at challenges, trends, and themes across all industries. There definitely are some common themes. I think that as a TPRM perspective, we are moving from what was largely a manual process, using spreadsheets, using manual forms that we sent out to vendors, to now the move towards automation, the move towards risk triggers that are sparking these assessments rather than just an annual assessment. So we're going to be looking at some of these trends and other trends across the industries. And then thirdly, we'll be looking at the projects that we've done and some of the learnings that we've gained. Hopefully these are some of the things that we can share that perhaps you haven't been in these pitfalls yet, and you can get those knowledge and take those back to your programs. Or maybe you will relate to something that has happened on your projects and how you learned from that, and possibly how our learnings are different and gain something in terms of our learnings. And then finally, I'm going to be sharing about what I think comes next from a TPRM perspective, and sharing what Mobius is doing in the TPRM space. Okay, great. So let's get stuck in. No presentation is any good if we don't start with a decent joke or cartoon. So here we go.
So hopefully this hasn't happened to you, but no doubt it will help you secure a larger TPRM budget if it has. So why does TPRM matter? The fact that you're here today indicates that you already have an understanding of that, but let's take a deeper dive. Leveraging third parties allows your organization to focus on what it does best. This translates to several benefits, and I've listed a few.
As we look at this list, think about why you are utilizing third parties. Whether you're a large corporate or a new startup, there may be reasons, and really good reasons, for leveraging third parties. It may be improved profitability. So if you're a large corporate and there's something that is costly for your organization to do, but if you outsource that to possibly operations, let's look at a support center, you outsource to India, there is a huge cost saving of doing that way rather than doing it internally. So if we look at coming to market for new startup organizations, they don't have to put in place a lot of the things that they would have had to in the past. They can rely on cloud service providers. They can use rented office spaces, and can basically bring a new product to market very quickly. But there are risks associated with those third parties that they're using. And there may be a huge competitive advantage in using some of these third parties, but I want us to think about what are the risks that you are exposing your organization to. And have we fully understood that, or have we just focused on the cost of the service, the quality of the service, but not necessarily the underlying controls that organization has in place, and whether they are as robust as we would put in place for our own organization?
In our experience, less than half the organizations undergo a proper due diligence before onboarding. And also these due diligences vary in terms of consistency.
Many of our consulting projects start with a client that hasn't done third-party risk management before, so we go and assess all of their third parties initially. When we're doing these assessments, what we've picked up is that often these third parties haven't been assessed. And this is where the stat comes from, is that many of the organizations, third parties, were not assessed at all, that no due diligence was done on these organizations. And even if there was a due diligence done, it was done from a business unit perspective, looking at this particular third party's ability to deliver the service rather than maybe the controls behind the scenes. How they're protecting the information, where is it being stored, how is it transmitted to the organization, the security controls in place, the ability for that organization to sustain operations, what is their disaster recovery capability looking like. So this is a general stat, but it is alarming to see how many third parties have actually been taken on to an organization and little or no due diligence was done. So this is really an important area of focus, that you come in and in your initial assessments actually look at all of your third parties and whether they were ever assessed and the quality of that assessment when your program is starting up. And it will take longer. You will need additional resources to do those first rounds of assessments. And once you're on top of the backlog, then you can basically continue to monitor your third parties and how they are, what controls they have in place and how they are operating.
Our observation is that most TPRM initiatives start with focusing on assessing and managing cyber risk, as vendors are hosting and processing large volumes of data on behalf of the organization. However, the increasing reliance on third parties across all aspects of business operations, there is growing realization of the importance of assessing third parties and the inclusion of a broader set of risks.
Let's take a moment to dive down into each of these other risks that we are now considering. Operational risk. Let's think about business continuity of your organization and whether that third party has got the business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans in place that they could sustain a major event within the organization, and whether those have been assessed. Reputational risk. Did we look into that organization, the ethics of management, the values of management? Are they aligned with our organization? Are they consistent? Workplace safety, in terms of how they are looking after their staff, is it consistent with our organization? And if there's an event that impacts their employees, will we be tarnished by that event being put into the press as being one of our major suppliers? Supply chain risk. Do they have the resilience in their process to maintain our supply chain requirements? Were those evaluated as part of the due diligence? Compliance risk, whether it's from a fraud perspective, perhaps on an anti-bribery perspective, have we evaluated these items and were those taken into consideration when selecting this vendor, either initially or on an annual basis? So I think as we see the complexity of our third-party landscape growing, these things become more important. We are not just looking at IT vendors anymore. We are now considering the broad landscape of all of the third parties, how we utilize them, and which of these vendors are really critical to our organization, and that we're assessing each of the aspects that we're reliant on these vendors for.
Here are some of the challenges and some of the trends in the TPRM space.
While we are talking about industry-specific and TPRM challenges by industry, I think it's worth mentioning that one of the things that we are seeing is the existence of consortiums or alliances in industries where you can come together within your industry and start to assess major third parties, major vendors within that industry as a consortium. There are benefits here in terms of cost saving. Often your risks may be slightly different, so you would need to have your own risk lens when looking at that third party, but the set of controls that could be assessed are often common, and you could agree in an industry to basically assess those third parties and then share those assessments across the industry. So this is fairly new, but it is a trend that I think that within an industry perspective we'll see more of in the coming years.
Regardless of the industry you're in, these are common challenges.
We're going to start with the third-party data breaches. This is still the number one driver and challenge most organizations face or fear. And there is evidence that indicates that if you have a breach through a third party, it'll have a greater impact on your reputation, and there will be a greater cost in terms of managing this breach. So that is still definitely the number one driver. I think that 2020, with all the third-party collaboration tools and everybody working remotely, has increased this risk even more. The next one is around the single source of third-party records. And I think that it seems that it's an easy thing to deal with, that we should be able to go to procurement and get a full list of all of our third parties, or it's sitting with the contracting department. But the reality is that business units are engaging directly with third parties, and also a lot of our third parties are not necessarily somebody that we have to pay. Third-party vendors have free services that you can enroll in, and if we look at cloud solutions, software as a service, there are so many solutions out there that are actually, there's no cost for these solutions. So we may not be going through procurement when selecting these solutions. Business units also have their own budgets and their own way of spending money, whether it's on credit cards, etc. So procurement isn't that full single source, and we need to have an exercise where we unpack where are all of our third parties sitting and get to a comprehensive list, because there may be third parties that we don't realize that we're engaging in. The next one for me is the insufficient resources. The nature of third-party risk management, and traditionally in the past, was very labor intensive. If we had manual spreadsheets, if we had questionnaires that we're sending out and following up, etc. So therefore we needed resources. These resources do need to have risk management skills, and the work in itself is quite demanding and quite, just to put it bluntly, boring. So therefore we see a churn in the team members that are involved in third-party risk management. So having the right team, having enough resources, and keeping them in place is definitely a challenge for most organizations. Lack of ownership is another one that is a common theme. We've seen different departments having responsibility for third-party risk management. Compliance functions is one option. We also see it sitting sometimes in procurement, as mentioned. But I think that the answer to this probably sits with each organization and what's going to work best. We do need to have ownership sitting at the right level so that we can escalate these items. So it's going to differ from organization to organization, but it is a challenge that many organizations are failing. Last few that I think are worth mentioning, obviously we've spoken about the growing number of outsourced vendors being used. We've spoken about the regulations that are coming in, whether it be GDPR, etc., or financial service specific regulations that are putting these demands on our organizations. But we're also seeing, in terms of our partners requiring us to have the same level of controls as that they may have. So in terms of those industry partners, there may be those requirements, and also internally there's a pushback that we get from our vendor managers. We are asking them to be involved in this process, and they may not be have time, and they may be reluctant to be able to drill down and do this third-party risk management to the degree that we are requiring. As we switch from talking about the challenges to some of the trends that we're seeing, let's just reflect a little bit on this stat. So this is a little bit dated. It's from a survey that was done by CEFPRO, and it dates back to about the end of 2018. But I think that in practice what we're seeing is that this is probably closer to about 50% of organizations are still using a manual spreadsheet or form process of doing third-party risk management. But the reality is that a lot of organizations are still following these manual processes. And the risks that go with that are some of those labor-intensive challenges that we spoke about earlier on, that when you are using spreadsheets, that you really are stuck in a cycle of a lot of administrative processes that go with your third-party risk management process. And sometimes you are missing the real value of your risk management because you're so caught up in the admin of actually managing all these assessments and tracking them and where they are and the status, etc. So now we'll switch to talking a little bit about the trends. Here are some of the trends that we see across the TPRM space. So closely aligned with the manual spreadsheets that we spoke about earlier on, we see the adoption of automation and workflow tools. So this is really essential if you want to get value out of your third-party risk management program. It does allow you to focus on the actual risks rather than the administrative nature of the third-party risk management programs. The number of vendors that we have and the number of volumes mean that this is a very repetitive process. So it is ideal for automation and workflow. And even with our low risk third parties, we have the opportunity to leverage automation and machine learning in terms of what is the risk, what is the correct response, and we don't need to have a high touch risk manager involved in these processes, and we can rather see what the risk is, identify what the recommendation is, and automate a lot of that with the low risk vendors. I will say with the automation, we need to always be looking at high risk vendors and making sure that we are reviewing those and not relying too much on the automation for those particular third parties. The next thing, and it's very much aligned with the automation, is this trigger of why a risk assessment happens. The traditional model has been that we do annual assessments of the third parties, maybe not every year if it's a low risk third parties, but now we're seeing machine learning and also artificial intelligence picking up what triggers this third party assessment happening. Is it a breach event that then triggers that you need to assess this third party? Is there a vulnerability that this third party may be open to that triggers that? So some of that artificial intelligence is coming through and triggers when we need to assess these third parties rather than just the repetitive annual process. The next one that's worth mentioning is just the broader focus, and we've already spoken about this, that we were initially just looking at cybersecurity, but now we are looking at these other risks within the third parties, and this third-party risk assessment is far more holistic than it used to be, and it includes all of these other elements that perhaps weren't there, and that also drives the third-party risk assessments are perhaps away from our cybersecurity teams or information security teams that initially might have been driving third-party risk management, but now it's a broader holistic. So that could result in you shifting who owns your third-party risk management. Fourth-party and fifth-party assessments is something we're seeing more of. Theoretically, you should be assessing your third party's ability to assess their third parties, but in reality, we're actually seeing that you are asking permission to directly assess what are fourth parties or fifth parties. So those vendors that your third parties are relying on and the risks that you may be facing because they are subcontracting a portion of this and doing direct assessments on them. With all of these assessments, we are seeing a lot of vendor fatigue, and that's also driving the shift towards being able to only assess a third party once, and driving certification on those third parties so that they would get an ISO certification that you can rely on, etc. Finally, integration, I think, is the thing that is worth mentioning. We see increase in integration. We have APIs that that are available, and that therefore integrating each of our third parties into the organization. But also within the organization, I think we're seeing an integration of risk management functions and working together across the lines of defense to get a holistic view of the risks and not duplicating effort within second line and third line, etc., that we can rely on a holistic approach to risk management.
Let's shift from trends to learning from the trenches.
Not to worry, we're not going to drill down too much into the slide. There's a lot of information here. You don't need to be able to read the detail over here. I just want to emphasize that in terms of your third-party risk management program, if you haven't done an assessment in terms of your maturity across a people, process, technology and governance layers, and figure out where you are, it's probably an important thing to do. These are important elements of every program, and you do need to know where you are so you can set targets of where you would like to be across each of these areas in 1 year, 2 years, etc. There are opportunities to leapfrog some of these maturity levels, and we're going to talk about some of that in the next slide. Here are some of our key learnings across each of the maturity levels for your TPRM program. Just so you know what you're looking at, basically what I'm putting down under initial is the steps that you need to do to get to repeatable and so forth. I'm going to focus in mainly on the defined and managed levels because I think most organizations are sitting in this space, but we'll touch on some of the other items too. So if you're at that defined stage, you now looking to get to a managed level, you probably need to build a team so that you can get through the backlog of third-party risk assessments that you need to do. If you haven't been doing due diligence properly on your third parties, there will be a significant backlog. You might want to bring in some contractors or outsource, have a project to be able to clear that backlog. When you're doing those assessments, be careful who you're sending the third-party risk assessment to. Make sure the right person who is completing it is the right person. Unfortunately, if we get hold of the sales folks, they will give possibly the answer you want to receive rather than actually what's happening. So having the right people answer the questionnaire and also validating the responses is key. I think that in terms of the controls you're asking your third parties to do, make sure that you're doing them. It's really tough to ask your third party to put in place a control if you yourself aren't following those controls internally. And then finally, make sure you're tracking remediations. At this level, often you are sending out a lot of third-party assessments, you're getting the information back, but to what degree are you, once you've defined those gaps, actually making sure the third parties close them? You don't want to, in a year's time, be picking up the same stuff that you found in year one in terms of your third-party risk management program. Now at the managed level, you have an established program and you're probably looking to automate, to get some efficiencies. You would be looking to get a leaner team. That's where the tools come in, and there's an opportunity for you to get real efficiencies. Think about an integrated risk log. Think about the fact that you're getting back all of these recommendations for the third parties, and can you put those items directly into an automated risk log that has got some workflow capability within it, and now you're able to track whether these items are being remediated in an automated manner. Tools like we use for that is called Resilience from Finity help us to basically see where are we with each of these items and how are we tracking in terms of remediating these items, and the tool will follow up, so it takes away a lot of that admin of making sure that these items have been cleared. In terms of the administration, we've spoken about the fact that they're huge volumes. So the degree to which you can automate some of that administration and triggering off when each of your assessments happen, it also helps the organization at that stage. Consider the lines of defense. Bring your audit function within. We spoke about the integration across the lines of defense. Bring your auditors in to actually assess these results that we've got back from the third party and give their opinion of whether they're accurate, and that will also help with reducing the amount of administration in terms of managing the TPRM program. So just to pick up on a couple of other items across the other areas, I think that awareness remains an important thing from the starting point where you have initial program and get executive buy-in all the way to the end, the increase in the amount of awareness. And then as we look into the optimizing phase, think about understanding your third party's perspective, understanding what they're going to get out of it. It is a great tool to actually build relationship with our third parties, and it's important for us to understand their perspective. So I hope these items are useful. There is a lot more that we haven't touched on over here, but you will get the slides, so please have a look at the detail afterwards. As we look to the future of what's to come for third-party risk management, we see that one of the key things that is happening now is the reliance on outsourced partners to be able to manage a third-party risk management program. A lot of our clients are using us and having us embedded within their teams to be able to be part of that team. So it was a natural progression for us to come up with a completely outsourced and managed service. It also, for a smaller organization, they do not have the ability to establish a proper TPRM program. You also get the benefit of being able to stay on the cutting edge of what's happening in the technology without having to buy a new solution each time. If you give that to your managed service provider, it's their responsibility to stay up to date with the correct solutions and what's coming in terms of automation, rather than having to identify a new solution each time. We work with Finity Risk Solutions, and we are using their triplicity to be able to do our automation and workflow of our third-party risk management program. The other tool of theirs that we use is Resilience, which is a risk log that basically has all of the roles and accountable for managing those risks baked into it, and then automates the workflow of the remediation and makes that management process so much easier. Wanted to take a moment to maybe just step through what is the process we follow as Mobius in terms of doing a third-party risk management program. This is based on our methodology that we have developed. I believe it's somewhat similar to a lot of the methodologies out there, but we have focused on making it really practical and easy to understand, and we have these key elements. So we spoke early on about the importance of identifying all of your third parties. This is very much still a labor-intensive item and is key to a success of any project and TPRM program. Once you have that full population, then it's really important to do that profiling. We limit ourselves to about 10 questions that you can be able to profile, and do those internally with the third-party relationship manager, and figure out where is my high risk, where is my low risk. And because once you have that, you can focus in on the high risk third parties and leave automation to deal with the low to medium risks, and really give your attention into those high risk third parties. The assessments that we do, these assessments have traditionally been based on ISO controls, NIST controls, but we are seeing broader control frameworks come through here in terms of how we assess the third parties. And these are questionnaires that we already have, and by going within a managed service provider, you don't have to keep on improving that. But organizations have got their own internal control catalogs, so certainly we can use your internal control catalogs to come up with this assessment approach. Again, the length of these assessments is key, and we are trying to keep it to less than 50 questions because this is very onerous for the third parties. When it comes to the reporting, dashboard reporting really does make a big difference to be able to, on one page, be able to see that, you know, here are my high risk vendors. This is where our residual risk is in terms of once we've assessed the controls, and it gives you that view that really is valuable for management. We've spoken about the fact that managing the risks you've identified and running those through to remediation is a key part of this, and being on top of those so that you don't go through your cycle and be able to reassess those items. We spoke about those other items that may be triggering your assessments, and certainly that is part of the space that we're seeing some evolution. What triggers a third-party risk management assessment to happen? It shouldn't just be an annual assessment. It shouldn't just be the risk profile. There are other triggers that are coming in. And with any continuous improvement process, obviously, it's important to assess the whole process and find those improvements on an annual basis or more regular basis to make sure that everything is improving. I hope this has been of interest to you, and if you have any specific questions around our third-party risk management program, please reach out to me afterwards.
I hope you found this presentation informative. Please visit us in our virtual booth or connect with me directly on LinkedIn. Thank you and have a good day.